My 7-year-old grandson, Michael, accidentally took my daughter-in-law Sarah's work iPad to school. His teacher called me. "Emily, you need to come immediately." I rushed to the school. The police were already there. An officer took me to another room. "What we found in there is terrible. Look, when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I'm glad you're here." If you're watching this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. That morning, I woke up to the familiar calm of a new day. At 67, my mornings usually start slow easy. The little old radio on the kitchen shelf played the news with its constant hum. Today they were saying something about a traffic jam downtown. Suddenly the phone rang sharp, tearing through the silence. I jumped and spilled a little coffee on the table. Quickly drying my hands on my worn-out apron, I answered, my heart beating a little faster. On the other end of the line was the voice of Miss Linda Michaels' teacher at Lincoln Elementary. Her voice was shaky, hurried like she was trying to hold back a panic attack. "Mrs. Emily, you need to come to the school immediately. Something happened, something serious with Michael." I felt my heart clench like someone was squeezing it. Thousands of horrible ideas raced through my head. My God, did the boy fall? Did he get hurt somewhere, teacher? I almost shouted, my voice breaking with fear. I imagined Michael lying somewhere, his knees bleeding, or worse, that he'd had an accident on the playground. Ms. Linda hesitated, her voice full of discomfort. "It's not that, but you have to come to understand." I didn't have time to ask more. My mind was spinning with only one thought. I had to get to Michael now. I quickly grabbed the old cardigan hanging behind the door without even turning off the stove, not caring about the coffee pot boiling over. I ran out into the street, my legs shaking but trying to walk as fast as possible. The world around me seemed to fade. I could only hear my heart pounding in my chest. In the cramped taxi, the driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Are you in a big hurry, ma'am?" he asked, his voice curious. I didn't answer. I just shook my head, my eyes fixed on the traffic outside the window. In my mind, Michael's image appeared. That little boy with curly hair, his little hands always squeezing mine when we went for a walk. If anything happened to him, I don't know how I could go on living. Michael is my light, the reason I still get up every morning with a little joy, even if life isn't easy anymore. When the taxi stopped in front of the school gate, the scene I saw froze me. 2 police cars were parked right in front of the yard, their red and blue lights flashing nonstop like knives in my heart. Some parents were gathered nearby, whispering with looks of curiosity and concern. I overheard a few words: police, device, serious. Every word was like a hammer blow to my head. I pushed my way through the crowd, almost running towards the office where I sensed Michael was. Entering the small office, I saw Michael right away. He was curled up in an old wooden chair, his little hands hugging his backpack, as if it were the only thing protecting him from the whole world. His eyes were red and swollen from crying so much. His little boy face was full of fear. I wanted to run and hug him, tell him everything was going to be okay, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. The principal, Mr. Evans, stood up from his wooden desk and approached me. His face showed concern. His voice was low. "Mrs. Emily, we found that Michael brought a device to class that contains some very strange things." Before I could understand what those strange things were, the door burst open. Officer Miller entered, a tall man with a serious face. In his hands, he carried an iPad carefully sealed in a clear plastic bag, the kind I had only seen in police movies. He looked me straight in the eyes with a cold, emotionless gaze. "This is your daughter-in-law's work iPad, Mrs. Sarah Ramirez," he said in a firm voice. "When we turned it on, we saw things that I think you should see with your own eyes." Sarah, my daughter-in-law, the wife my son David was always so proud of. The mother Michael adored. I felt a chill run down my spine. Sarah worked at a big pharmaceutical company, always busy with meetings and work trips. That iPad, I remembered Michael had told me he took it by mistake from his mom's desk, thinking it was his to play games on. I scolded him for being careless, but I never thought the consequences would be so severe. Miller motioned for me to follow him into a small adjacent room. As soon as the door closed, all the outside noises, the parents' murmurs, the sound of cars disappeared. It was just me, Miller, and the iPad on the table. He unlocked the screen, and what appeared made my world fall apart. In front of me, there were no math assignments or kids' games like the ones Michael used to play. It was a completely different world, a world I never thought could exist in my family. Long messages full of sweet words that weren't for David, but for a man named Daniel. Photos being sent not of the family or Michael's birthday, but shadowy images full of secrets. And then bank transactions with huge numbers, business documents full of terms I couldn't understand. I scrolled page after page, my hands shaking with a lump in my throat like someone was choking me. What is this? I whispered, my voice broken. Miller didn't answer right away. He just looked at me with an expression between stern and compassionate. "We are investigating," he finally said. "But what's in here indicates that Mrs. Sarah Ramirez is involved in illegal activities. Very serious ones." I slumped into the chair, feeling like my body didn't have an ounce of strength. Sarah, the daughter-in-law I thought was the perfect woman, hard-working, attentive, loving to her husband and son. I remembered the night she cooked for everyone, the way she smiled at Michael, how she held David's hand. All of that now seemed like a lie. I thought of David, my son, who had given his whole heart to his wife, and Michael, that innocent child, who was now sitting outside, scared and not understanding what was happening. Officer Miller's deep, cold voice cut through, pulling me from my daze. "We are seizing this device for the investigation. You cannot take it with you." I stayed there, my hands still trembling, nodding like an automaton. In my head, the images from the iPad kept spinning. The messages, the figures, the secrets I never imagined would appear in my family. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to understand why, but my throat was dry. I couldn't say a word. A young officer with an impeccable uniform came in with a folder in his hand. He read in a monotone voice as if completing a routine form. "Evidence seized at Lincoln Elementary School from student Michael Ortega. 1 iPad device serial number." I stopped listening. I just felt my hands tremble as I took the pen to sign the report. My signature came out crooked, a scribble that reflected the chaos in my mind. Michael, my innocent boy, was now caught in a mess that not even I, a 67-year-old woman with experience, could understand. A female police officer, slender and with a soft voice, approached Michael. "Hey there, champ. Want to come with me to the playground for a bit?" she said, trying to smile to calm him. Michael looked at me, his eyes still red, and then obediently, he took the officer's hand and left. Seeing his small back walk away, I felt my heart break. He's only 7 years old. At this time, he should be running with his friends, not huddled in the principal's office surrounded by police. Ms. Linda was nearby, her hands clasped, her gaze full of guilt. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Emily," she said with a shaky voice. "I was just going to open the device to check Michael's homework. I never imagined—" I looked at her, wanting to tell her I didn't blame her, that it was all a terrible mix-up, but I just nodded, slightly too weak to speak. In my head, everything was a knot. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, whom I trusted, whom I considered an exemplary mother and wife, was now linked to things so dark I didn't even dare to think about them. As I left the office, I overheard the police officers whispering among themselves. One name was repeated like another knife in my heart: Daniel Stevens. I didn't know who he was, but that name gave me a chill. He was like a shadow, a threat I couldn't yet see clearly. I took Michael's hand tightly and led him out of the school. The group of parents was still there, their curious gazes following us. I lowered my head and quickened my pace, just wanting to escape those stares. In the taxi on the way home, the driver looked at us in the rearview mirror. "These are scary times," he said, clicking his tongue. "Kids bring the strangest things to school now." I didn't respond, just squeezed Michael's hand tighter. The boy was silent, his gaze lost out the window, but I knew he was scared. "Grandma," he said suddenly in a tiny voice, "I'm sorry I didn't mean to grab Mom's iPad." I hugged him, trying to hold back the tears. "Don't worry, my love," I whispered. "It's not your fault." But inside, I knew this went far beyond a simple mix-up. When we got home, the house felt empty and cold. David, my son, had left for work early. It was just Michael and me in a heavy silence. I quickly made him some chamomile tea, hoping the gentle aroma would calm him. Michael sat at the kitchen table, hugging the mug with his little hands, but his gaze was still distant. "Grandma, what are they going to do to Mom's iPad?" he asked. I didn't know what to tell him. I just stroked his head and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to fix everything." On the table, the evidence seizure report was still there, my shaky signature, a reminder of what had just happened. I picked up the phone and dialed David. 1 ring, 2 rings, and then just a busy tone. My son wasn't answering. I thought about calling Sarah, but my hand stopped. The serious image of Officer Miller, the messages, the photos on the iPad, it all came back so clearly. I didn't dare face her. I didn't dare ask her what she was hiding. In the afternoon, I sent Michael to my good neighbor Rose's house. "I'm just running to the supermarket," I lied, just to have a moment alone. But instead of going to the market, I walked aimlessly through the familiar streets. The images from the iPad wouldn't stop spinning in my head. The sweet messages, the huge figures, the documents full of secrets. I stopped by a tree leaning against its old trunk, trying to breathe to calm myself. But the fear clung to me like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I thought about David, about the years we had spent together. When my husband died, David was the only one by my side, my support. And now I had to tell him the truth. That the wife he loved, the mother of his child, might be living a completely different life. My soul ached. I didn't want to destroy my son's happiness, but I couldn't let Michael grow up in a family full of lies either. That night when David came home, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to tell my son the truth. I sat at the dining room table holding a cup of cold chamomile tea, watching David silently eat each spoonful. Michael had already eaten and was playing with his toy cars in a corner of the living room. Sarah was still there, playing her role of the perfect wife and mother. She cleared the table, smiled sweetly, chatted with Michael about his homework as if nothing had happened. Seeing her, I couldn't help but shiver. How could someone act so well when just hours before I had seen her terrible secrets on that iPad, I tried to stay calm, to keep my gaze from revealing the suspicion burning inside me. I waited for Sarah to go into the bathroom and the sound of running water to fill the house. Then I got up and pulled David out onto the balcony. The cool night air was blowing, bringing the smell of eucalyptus from the neighbor's yard. David looked at me, his eyes tired. "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you so tense?" he asked in his deep voice. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. This was my son, whom I had raised, whom I had watched grow up. How was I going to tell him that the woman he loved might be betraying him, that his family was about to break apart? "David," I began, my voice trembling. "Today at Michael's school, I saw things that I don't want to believe, but I can't not tell you." I told him everything from the panicked call from Ms. Linda, the scene with the police cars in front of the school, to what I saw on Sarah's iPad. The affectionate messages, the bank transactions, the secret documents. I blurted it all out, as if stopping would mean losing the courage to continue. "I saw it with my own eyes, David. The police are investigating, and they mentioned a name, Daniel Stevens." David frowned. His gaze filled with confusion, but then he shook his head as if trying to push my words away. "Mom, that's absurd," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "Sarah is my wife Michael's mom. She would never do something like that." "It must be a mistake. Someone could have used her iPad, or it's a very sick joke." I took his hand, trying to make my voice sound calm, even though my heart was pounding. "David, I don't want to believe it either, but I saw the messages, the photos, the figures. The police kept the iPad as evidence. You have to believe me." David's patience seemed to run out. He pulled his hand away, threw the cigarette he was holding to the ground, and his eyes flashed with anger. "Mom, you're trying to make me doubt my own wife." He shouted at me in a tone higher than I had ever heard him use. "Don't you see how tired I am? I work all day to support my family, and now you want me to believe Sarah is cheating on me. I don't want to hear any more." His words were like a stab wound. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him so he would wake up, but I just stood there helpless, watching my son turn his back on me and go back inside. Just then the bathroom door opened. Sarah came out, her hair still damp, a towel over her shoulders. She looked at David and me with an expression of surprise. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked in her soft voice, but I noticed a flash of tension in her. David turned to his wife, and his gaze softened instantly, as if all his doubts had vanished in a second. "Nothing, sweetie," he said lightly. "My mom is just worrying too much. I always trust you." Sarah smiled a perfect smile, but I caught a fleeting instant of panic in her eyes before she covered it with her fake sweetness. "Mom, why do you think that about me?" she said, her voice choked, as if holding back tears. "Did I do something wrong?" I wanted to scream to unmask her, but I stayed quiet. Her words were part of a play, and I knew I couldn't beat her at that game. Not now. Dinner that night was as heavy as lead. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the scraping of spoons against plates and the TV news in the living room. Michael, sensitive like all children, felt the tension. He looked at me, then at his dad, and asked quietly, "Are Mom and Dad fighting?" David quickly pulled him close, stroking his head. "No, champ, everything's fine," he said, but his voice trembled as if he didn't believe it himself. I looked at Michael, my heart in a knot. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be trapped between the truth and the lies. Sarah cleared the plates in silence, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye every now and then. Those looks were no longer those of a daughter-in-law, but silent warnings. I tried to act normal, poured Michael more water, but inside I was a storm. I knew she was studying me, trying to guess how much I knew. After dinner, Sarah suddenly stood up, making an excuse. "I have something urgent from work. I have to step out for a moment." She put on her coat, grabbed her bag, and left before I could say anything. David just nodded, as if he was already used to his wife's unexpected outings. I stood by the window watching Sarah's figure disappear under the dim streetlights. In the darkness, I saw her stop at the corner and pull out her phone. Her voice, though low, reached me through the slightly open window. "Daniel," she whispered in a tone full of distress. I froze, my heart racing. That name again, like a ghost, confirming that what I saw on the iPad was not a mistake. That night when Michael was asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen under the dim light that illuminated my face. The fear still clung to me, but mixed with it was a fierce determination. I couldn't let my family fall apart. I couldn't let Michael grow up in a world of lies. I knew I had to do something, even if it meant facing the most painful truth. The next morning, as I was hanging laundry in the yard, the phone vibrated in my apron pocket, breaking the silence. I dried my hands, feeling my heart pound when I saw Officer Miller's number on the screen. "Mrs. Emily, we need you to come to the station immediately to give us more information," his serious voice said, straight to the point. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and replied, "I'm on my way." I ran into the house. I checked that Michael was playing with his puzzles in the living room. The boy looked up and gave me an innocent smile, but his eyes still held a trace of yesterday's confusion. "Where are you going, Grandma?" he asked in his little voice. I stroked his head, forcing a smile. "I'm just going to run an errand, my love. Be good. I'm going to ask Rose to watch you." Michael nodded, but I know he sensed my unease. I went to Rose's house, the neighbor who has been with my family for so many years. She was watering her potted plants in the yard, her gray hair peeking out from under a straw hat. "Rose, can you watch Michael for a little while, please?" I said, trying to stay calm. Rose looked at me, her eyes full of worry. "Emily, something's not right, is it? I've seen you so tense since yesterday." I shook my head. I didn't want to drag her into this dangerous mess. "It's my own business, don't worry." Rose nodded, but I know she didn't believe me. The police station was a noisy, busy place with a thick air that smelled like sweat and paper. A young officer led me down a long hallway, the echo of my shoes resounding on the cold granite floor. They took me to a small conference room with tinted windows that hid the curious glances from outside. Inside, Officer Miller was standing arms crossed with the same serious look from yesterday. Sitting next to him was a middle-aged woman, intelligent-looking, dressed in a dark blue pantsuit. She stood up and shook my hand firmly, confidently. "I'm Prosecutor Kate Cruz." She introduced herself, her voice clear and decisive. "I'll be handling this case." And Prosecutor Cruz slid a thick folder towards me full of printed pages with letters, numbers, and images. "This is what we extracted from your daughter-in-law's iPad," she said, pointing to a highlighted name on the first page. "Daniel Stevens. He's the director of a large pharmaceutical corporation, but he's also the main suspect in a case we've been following for a long time." I turned the pages, feeling my heart beat faster, as I saw the figures from the bank transactions. Millions of dollars moving between domestic and foreign accounts. Emails exchanged in dry professional language, but hiding something shady that I couldn't quite understand. But what left me breathless were the internal documents about inflated contracts and the production of fake drugs. I saw photos of a factory with chimneys spewing thick black smoke and a river of dark water flowing directly into the river near our city, the same river where the neighborhood kids, including Michael, used to swim on hot days. I remembered the afternoons when Michael would come home, his hair soaking wet, excitedly telling me he had caught a little fish. The idea that this water could be poisoned made me shudder, and I gripped the edge of the table tightly. Prosecutor Cruz watched me, her gaze both stern and understanding. "We've been after Stevens for a long time, but we didn't have direct proof," she explained. "Your daughter-in-law's iPad is the key. It contains everything we need to dismantle this network." I nodded, but my mind was spinning. Sarah, whom I considered a daughter, was involved in something so horrible. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to understand how she could betray her family, but I had a lump in my throat and couldn't speak. Miller chimed in, his voice turning graver, full of warning. "But this also means that you and your grandson are in danger. If Stevens or someone in his network finds out that you've seen this, they won't just stand by." His words were like a bucket of cold water. I sat frozen, my icy hands clasped, feeling fear run through my whole body. I thought of Michael, his innocent smile, and David, who was still blindly in love with his wife. If they found out I was cooperating with the police, what would happen? I left the station with my head feeling heavy as lead. Outside, reporters were surrounding another suspect with microphones everywhere and camera flashes going off nonstop. I pulled down the brim of my hat and walked quickly through the crowd, praying no one would recognize me. On the bus back home, I huddled in a corner seat, staring out the window, seeing nothing but blurry images of the city. In my mind, there was only one thought. I had to protect Michael, no matter what. He is my light, the reason I keep living after so much pain. I couldn't let them hurt him. I couldn't let those shadows touch him. When I got home, I barely opened the door and saw Sarah sitting in the living room, a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked up and stared at me, cold and probing, as if trying to read my face for what I knew. "Where did you go, Mom?" "You were gone a long time," she asked, her voice soft but loaded with intent. I forced a smile, clutching my purse. "Oh, I went to the market to buy a few things," I replied, my voice shaky. Sarah nodded, but her eyes never left me, like a predator stalking its prey. The following days, I lived like a shadow, silently observing everything in the house that was once my family's home. Every morning I woke up with a heavy feeling, like a stone on my chest. I tried to make Michael's days normal. I took him to school, made him breakfast, but my mind never stopped spinning around Sarah and the secrets she was hiding. I knew I had to be careful, make everything seem normal, but Sarah's prying gaze made me feel like I was walking on thin ice. During breakfast, I noticed Sarah couldn't stop checking her phone. She sat across from me, coffee cup in hand, but her eyes were glued to the screen. Every time a message came in, she would flip the phone over on the table, as if afraid someone would see. I pretended to be busy pouring milk for Michael, smiling at him, as he told me about a drawing he made in class. But not a single one of Sarah's movements escaped me. She seemed to be living in her own world, a world where neither I nor David, not even Michael, had a place. "Michael, finish your milk, honey, so I can take you to school," I said, trying to make my voice sound natural. Sarah looked up, glanced at me, and then looked back down at her phone. "I have an early meeting today," she told David in a flat voice. "I'll probably be a little late." David nodded without asking more, as if he was already used to his wife's strange hours. I looked at him with a pain in my soul. My son, this man who used to be strong and confident, now seemed oblivious to the cracks spreading through his own family. That afternoon, Sarah said she had to go to a last-minute meeting. I was at the kitchen door watching her put on a dark blue dress perfume and her hair perfectly styled. "What kind of meeting requires you to be so dressed up?" I blurted out, trying to sound casual. Sarah turned and smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Important clients are coming to the company, Mom," she replied, and quickly grabbed her bag and left. The door slammed shut, leaving a cold silence. My instinct told me something was wrong. I couldn't just stand by. I couldn't let things go on like this without doing anything. I ran to Rose's house to drop off Michael. "Rose, I have an emergency." "Can you watch the boy for a bit?" I said, trying to hide the panic in my voice. Rose looked at me worried. "Emily, you're acting very strange. If something's wrong, tell me, don't keep it inside." I just shook my head. I thanked her and left in a hurry. I took a taxi, my heart pounding, and asked the driver to follow Sarah's car. "Please don't let her see us following," I whispered, my gaze fixed on Sarah's white sedan up ahead. The taxi driver looked at me in the rear-view mirror, but didn't ask questions. He just nodded and sped up. Sarah's car stopped in front of a luxury shopping center where glass buildings shone in the sun. I saw her get out walking confidently, but looking around as if searching for someone. Then a gleaming black SUV pulled up abruptly. A man in a suit and dark glasses got out and opened the door for her. I barely managed to see the license plate before Sarah got in and the SUV sped off, disappearing into traffic. I stayed there, gripping the seat, trying to memorize the plates. The man's face was blurry, but the way Sarah got into the car without hesitation made me feel like I was choking. I asked the driver to take me home, my mind a mess. The image of the black SUV and Sarah's furtive glance haunted me, a confirmation that what I saw on the iPad was not a mistake. A few days later, I was called back to the station. In the small conference room, Prosecutor Cruz and Officer Miller were waiting for me. "Mrs. Emily, do you have any new information?" Miller asked with his piercing gaze. I took a deep breath and told them what I had seen that day, from how Sarah left the house to the black SUV. I repeated the license plate, my voice trembling. Miller took notes and turned to another officer, giving him the order to check them immediately. A few minutes later, he returned and nodded. "It's Daniel Stevens' car." Prosecutor Cruz handed me a file with a photo of Daniel Stevens taken at a charity event. He was wearing an elegant suit, and his arrogant fake smile sent a shiver down my spine. "This is Sarah's lover and the mastermind of the whole network," Prosecutor Cruz said, her voice grave but firm. "He's behind the production of fake drugs and the money laundering. Your daughter-in-law's iPad has given us the evidence to get closer to arresting him." I looked at the photo, feeling my blood run cold. Daniel Stevens. That name was no longer just a ghost, but a real person with a fake smile and cold eyes. I thought about Sarah, how she continued to act like the perfect wife in front of David, and my soul ached. How could she live two lives? On one hand, Michael's mother, and on the other, an accomplice to a man like Stevens. That night, we were all watching TV, but I couldn't concentrate. Suddenly, a report came on the news praising Daniel Stevens for his great contributions to public health. His image on the screen in the middle of a crowd applauding him froze me. The applause from the television was like hammer blows on my heart. I glanced at Sarah and saw her smiling, but it was a tense smile, as if she was trying to hide something. David didn't notice he was focused on the screen, and Michael yawned, resting his head on my shoulder. Late at night, I got up for a glass of water, still restless. As I passed the kitchen, I was surprised to see Sarah sitting there in the dark, with only the light from her phone illuminating her face. I quickly hid behind the door, my heart racing. Sarah was whispering into the phone, her voice sweet but full of tension. "I love you, Daniel," she said with a happy smile I had never seen her give David. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling my world collapse once more. I went back to my room in silence, lay down, but couldn't sleep. On Saturday night, the atmosphere in the house seemed a bit lighter. David and Michael were sitting in front of the TV watching a football game enthusiastically. The shouts from the screen mixed with the laughter of father and son. I was in the kitchen cutting fruit, trying to immerse myself in this rare moment of peace. But deep down, I knew it was all a facade. The fear and suspicion were still there, like a shadow that never left. Sarah walked into the living room, smiled tenderly at Michael, and then turned to David. "I need to make a work call," she said in a soft voice, as if nothing was wrong. "It's an urgent team meeting, you know." David nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. "Sure, honey, go ahead," he replied unconcerned. Sarah went into the small study at the end of the hall and closed the door. I put down the knife and looked at the plate of fruit, feeling a deep unease. I don't know what drove me, but my feet carried me down the hallway on their own. As I passed the study door, I heard Sarah's voice, harsh and tense, completely different from the sweetness she had just shown. "It can't be," she almost shouted, her voice trembling. "The police have the iPad. If everything is discovered, we're finished." I stopped short, my heart pounding so hard I felt it would burst out of my chest. A man's voice, deep and cold, answered on speakerphone, loud enough for me to hear every word. "Calm down, Sarah. If that old woman dares to open her mouth, we'll have to make her pay, understand?" I knew he was referring to me. That threat was like a sharp knife stabbing into my heart, making me feel that the danger was no longer a distant worry, but a reality closing in. Inside, Sarah was silent for a moment, and then she replied in a low but determined voice, "I know. I'll take care of it." I tiptoed back so as not to make a sound and ran back to the kitchen. I stood there gripping the edge of the table, trying to catch my breath. My breathing was heavy as if I had run a marathon. I looked at the plate of fruit, the perfectly cut pieces of mango and watermelon, and told myself I had to act normal. If Sarah found out I had heard her, if she suspected I was watching her, I didn't dare think about what would happen to Michael, to David, to this whole family. A moment later, Sarah came out of the study, her face unreadable. But as soon as she saw David and Michael, she forced a radiant smile, as if that terrifying call had never happened. "Who wants fruit?" she asked in a syrupy voice, taking the plate from my hands. Michael shouted with joy and ran to his mom while David smiled and hugged him. I stood there watching the scene, but with a cold feeling in my soul. How could she act so well? How could she smile at her son when she had just been plotting such dark things? That night, the atmosphere in the house became more tense than ever. Michael accidentally spilled a glass of milk on the table, something minor that normally no one would have noticed. But Sarah exploded, her eyes flashing with fury. "It's all your fault," she yelled at him, her voice cutting. "All the problems are because of you." Michael froze, his round eyes full of fear on the verge of tears. I understood immediately that she was referring to Michael taking the iPad to school, but her words were too cruel for a 7-year-old. David jumped up, put a hand on his wife's shoulder, and said, bewildered, "Sarah, what are you saying? He's just a kid." Sarah forced a smile, but it was a grimace that couldn't hide her tension. "Sorry," she said, softening her voice. "I'm just really tired today. Don't mind me." She bent down to clean up the spilled milk, but she shot me a look out of the corner of her eye like a silent warning. I hugged Michael, who was sobbing with his face buried in my shoulder. "It's not your fault, my love," I whispered, rubbing his back. "Grandma is here. I'll always protect you." But inside, I knew I was facing a danger much greater than I had imagined. I couldn't sleep all night. The threat from that man's voice, surely Daniel Stevens, echoed in my ears. If that old woman dares to open her mouth... I lay there with the pale moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating the family photo hanging on the wall. It was from Michael's birthday last year, when we were all laughing happily. Now Sarah's smile in that photo gave me chills. I thought of Michael, of David, and wondered if I would have the strength to face what was coming. The next morning I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I again left Michael with Rose, telling her I was going to the market, but really I went straight to the station. In the small conference room, Prosecutor Kate Cruz was waiting for me, her gaze sharp but understanding. I told her the entire conversation. I overheard every detail, from Sarah's agitated voice to Daniel's cold threat. He said if I opened my mouth, they would make me pay. I told her, my voice trembling. Prosecutor Cruz nodded, taking notes, and then looked at me. "This information is very important, Mrs. Emily," she said firmly. "It proves Sarah is directly involved with Daniel in covering up the crime. We are going to intensify surveillance on her." I left the station feeling a little lighter for having shared the burden, but the fear didn't leave me. On the way back, as the bus passed a familiar corner, I caught a glimpse of the black SUV I had seen at the mall. It was parked silently in the shade of a tree, and its headlights flashed once like a warning. I shuddered and clutched the handkerchief in my purse. The danger was no longer a distant concern. It was right in front of me, closer than ever. After that meeting at the station, I returned home with my heart in a knot. God, yes. Prosecutor Cruz had told me they had enough reason to request a warrant to tap Sarah's phone, and that a technical team had already discreetly installed a device on the cell phone she always carried. "Mrs. Emily, you have to act completely natural," the prosecutor warned me with her serious gaze. "Under no circumstances can you let her suspect. If she finds out you're cooperating with us, everything will become much more dangerous." I nodded, but inside I was a storm of fear and determination. I couldn't let Michael, my only light, be pulled into this vortex. The following days, I lived like an actress trying to stay calm in front of Sarah. Every morning, I continued to make coffee breakfast for Michael, laughing with him as if nothing was wrong. But every time I looked at Sarah, I had to suppress the anger and pain burning inside me. She continued to play her role of the perfect wife, hugging Michael, asking David about his work. But her eyes always passed over me, scrutinizing, as if looking for a crack in the facade of normality I had built. One afternoon, my phone vibrated. It was Officer Miller. "Mrs. Emily, we need you to come to the station immediately," he said, his voice urgent. I quickly left Michael with Rose. I lied, saying I was going to the market, and took a taxi to the station. In the small conference room, it was just Miller, Prosecutor Cruz, and me. The tension was so thick I could hardly breathe. Miller turned on a small recorder on the table, and Sarah's voice echoed clear and cold like a stab in my heart. "David is nothing," she said, her tone full of contempt. "I only need you, Daniel. When all this calms down, we'll go to Miami together." "And the kid? Who cares? That's what the old woman is for." I collapsed into the chair, feeling the world cave in. My heart felt crushed. Sarah, the mother. Michael loved the wife David trusted blindly, was capable of saying such cruel words. Not only was she betraying David, but she was willing to abandon Michael, the child she had rocked and sung to sleep every night. I covered my face, tears streaming uncontrollably. "How could she?" I whispered, my voice broken. Miller pushed a glass of water toward me. His gaze softened, but remained stern. "I know this is very difficult, Mrs. Emily," he said. Prosecutor Cruz continued in a soft but firm voice. "Now you have irrefutable proof to show your son. We will support you, but you need to be strong." I nodded, drying my tears. But in my mind, there was only one thought. David had to know the truth, even if it destroyed him. That night, I brought the recording home, my soul heavy. Michael was playing with his blocks in the living room, and David had just gotten home from work, taking off his jacket. I waited for Michael to go to his room, and then I took David out to the patio. The night wind was blowing, bringing the coolness of autumn. "David, I need you to listen to this," I said with a shaky voice, handing him the small recorder Miller had given me. David looked at me, his eyes full of doubt. "Again with this. Mom, I already told you I don't want to hear any more nonsense about Sarah." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Just listen to it, David, just this once." "If I'm wrong, I'll never mention it again." He hesitated, but finally took the recorder. When Sarah's voice echoed, I saw David's face change. Doubt turned to shock, and then to a deathly pale. "Maybe it's edited," he muttered, but his voice trembled as if he didn't believe what he was saying. Just then my phone rang. It was Miller. I put it on speaker, and his voice resonated serious. "Mrs. Emily, I have sent you this recording from the official surveillance system. It is authentic evidence without any alteration." David sank into the chair, holding his head, his eyes red. Michael ran out of his room, sensing the tension. "What's wrong, Daddy?" he asked in a worried voice, clinging to David's hand. He could only hug his son tightly, unable to say a word. I knelt, stroked Michael's head, forcing a smile. "Nothing's wrong, my love. Your daddy is just a little tired." Sarah came home late that night. She walked in with her perfect smile. But when she saw David's expression, her smile froze. David looked at her, but his eyes were different. There was no tenderness, just a pain mixed with anger. Still, he tried to seem normal. "Everything good at the meeting, honey?" he asked. Sarah nodded with a soft voice. "Yes, everything's fine, darling. Just a little tired." I was there watching her act my heart breaking. She didn't know David had heard the recording. She didn't know her curtain of lies was about to fall. The air in the house felt dense heavy. Michael, sensing the tension, went quietly to his room to play alone with his teddy bear. I looked at him, a lump in my throat. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be trapped between the truth and the lies. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't promise him anything right then. A few days later, Prosecutor Cruz arrived at the house unannounced. She was wearing a long coat, and her gaze was serious. "Mrs. Emily, we have news," she said gravely. "Surveillance data shows that Sarah and Daniel are planning to escape. They've already bought plane tickets to Miami. We have to act now." I sank onto the sofa, feeling the floor open up beneath me. Sarah was not only betraying David, she was going to abandon Michael to leave everything to be with Daniel. I looked at the prosecutor, my voice trembling. "What do I do now, Michael? He can't lose his mom like this." Prosecutor Cruz put a hand on my shoulder. Her gaze was firm but compassionate. "We need your cooperation," she said. "Keep watching Sarah. Inform us of any strange movements. And prepare for the worst." Her words were like a knife. They sent a chill down my spine. What was the worst, Michael losing his mother David, ending up with a broken heart, or my family being dragged into even greater danger? That early morning, I woke up with a terrible restlessness. I was washing dishes when the phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Officer Miller. His voice was urgent, direct. "Mrs. Emily, we just discovered that Sarah bought emergency plane tickets to Miami. The flight leaves from the main city airport tonight." I froze. The plate I was holding almost slipped from my hands. Miami. That word echoed in my head like a sharp knife. Sarah was really going to escape. To leave David. To leave Michael. To leave everything to go with Daniel Stevens. "Are you listening to me?" Miller's voice brought me back to reality. "Yes, I hear you," I replied, my voice trembling. "What do I have to do? But you need to tell David. He has to know the truth, and we need cooperation from both of you." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and hung up my heart a stone. I immediately thought of David, my son, who was still living in blind faith in the woman he loved. I couldn't let him keep deceiving himself. I put on a coat, left Michael with Rose, and took a taxi to the construction site where David worked. When I arrived, he was standing by a pile of bricks, sweating, his eyes tired. When he saw me, he was surprised. "Mom, what are you doing here? Did something happen?" I took him to a corner where no one could hear us. Tears were welling up as I said, "David, you have to come with me. Sarah is going to escape. She bought plane tickets to Miami with Daniel Stevens. You have to see the truth with your own eyes or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." David looked at me. His eyes wavered between disbelief and pain. He shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Mom again with this. I took his hands, cutting him off. "David, I'm begging you just this once. If I'm wrong, I'll never mention it again." He was silent for a long time, his eyes red, and finally he nodded. "Okay, Mom. I'll go." I hugged him, feeling my own heart break. I knew this truth was going to destroy my son, but I couldn't let him live a lie. In the afternoon, the police picked us up. In the car, Miller explained the plan, his voice calm but decisive. "We have undercover agents who will pose as passengers. A team will be at the security checkpoint and another will wait at the boarding gate. Mrs. Emily David, you just have to be there and confirm the identity of Sarah and Stevens. Don't do anything to arouse suspicion." I nodded, clutching the sweat-drenched handkerchief in my hand. David was beside me, silent, his gaze lost out the window, as if searching for a bit of peace before the storm. At the main city airport, the atmosphere was a chaos of noise and people. Flight announcements mixed with conversations, but for me it was all a distant hum. We were taken to a discreet corner in the waiting area where we could see without being seen. I sat next to David, holding his hand tightly. He said nothing, but I felt the tension in every breath he took. "Mom, if all this is true," he whispered, his voice broken. I squeezed his hand, not daring to answer, just whispered, "I'm here, David. We'll get through this." At the appointed time, I saw Sarah appear. She was wearing a long gray coat, dark sunglasses, and dragging a large suitcase. Next to her was Daniel Stevens, in an elegant suit, walking with an air of superiority. They were laughing and talking like a couple about to start a romantic trip. Seeing it, I felt a pain that tore my soul apart. I glanced at David and saw him frozen rigid as a statue. His eyes were red, his hands clenched into fists. "You see," I whispered, my voice trembling, holding back tears. Just as Sarah handed her passport to the airport employee, the space was shattered by a firm shout. "Police! Nobody move Daniel Stevens and Sarah Ramirez. You are under arrest." It all happened in an instant. The undercover agents appeared from nowhere and surrounded them. Daniel tried to run, but two burly men tackled him to the ground immediately. Sarah screamed and writhed, her voice shrill. "You're mistaken. I'm innocent. I didn't do anything." David ran towards her, unable to hold back any longer. "Why, Sarah?" he yelled, his voice choked with pain. "Why did you do it? Me, Michael, this family. You threw it all away for him." Sarah turned her gaze, terrified, but she quickly regained her composure and said coldly, "You don't understand, David. You would never understand." Her words were like a stab that left David motionless, his face pale. I ran to Michael, who was hiding behind me, his eyes wide with fear. I hugged him, covered his eyes with my hand, and whispered, "Don't look, my love. Grandma is here." Michael was trembling and asked in a tiny voice, "What's wrong with my mom, Grandma?" I didn't know what to answer. I just held him tighter, feeling his little heartbeat at full speed. I wanted to protect him from that scene, from the cruel truth that his mother had chosen a path where he didn't fit. As the police were taking Sarah and Daniel away, she turned abruptly. Her gaze locked onto me, cold and full of hate, as if I were the one to blame for destroying everything. I stood there hugging Michael, watching her in handcuffs, feeling a mix of pain and relief. The truth had come out, but it had also destroyed my family. David was motionless, his gaze empty, following his wife with his eyes as they took her away. I wanted to run and hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew those words at that moment meant nothing. After the arrest at the airport, they took us straight to the station to give our statements. The police car moved silently through the busy city streets, but I had no mind for anything but Michael, who was snuggled against me, trembling, his little hands clinging to my clothes, as if afraid that if he let go, he would lose me forever. I held him tightly, trying to give him some warmth to calm his fear, but I myself was in the midst of a storm of emotions. David was next to me, absent as a shadow, his eyes red and his gaze lost out the window. He said nothing, but I knew his heart was in pieces. At the station, the air was thick, filled with the incessant sound of telephones and the hurried footsteps of officers. They took us to a small waiting room where the cold metal chairs made me feel even more alone. I held Michael in my arms, stroking his back and whispering, "Everything is going to be okay, my love." But my words sounded empty, as if I didn't believe them myself. From the interrogation room just steps away came Sarah's screams, sharp and desperate. "I'm innocent. I don't know anything. You're making a mistake." The furious slam of Prosecutor Cruz's fist on the table silenced her voice, but every word from Sarah was like a knife in my heart. She kept denying everything, clinging to her perfect facade, even when everything had crumbled. Hours passed in that cold waiting room. Michael fell asleep on my lap, and his peaceful breathing was the only thing that kept me sane. David was still there without a word, his hands clenched white. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but what words could ease the pain of someone who just lost the world they believed in? Finally, an officer approached and allowed us to leave. "That's enough for today," he said in a dry voice. "We'll contact you if we need more information." But as soon as we walked out the station doors, a crowd of reporters surrounded us. Camera flashes blinded us. Microphones were shoved in our faces, and questions rained down like a torrential downpour. "What role did your family play in the Daniel Stevens case? How does it feel that your daughter-in-law has been arrested?" I quickly covered Michael's face with my coat, terrified that his innocent gaze would be captured in the newspapers. David could barely walk, staggering. I took his arm and helped him push through the crowd, praying for some peace. "We're not answering. Please let us pass," I shouted, my voice broken with exhaustion and anger. When we got home, Rose was waiting at the door, her gray hair messy and her eyes full of anguish. "Oh, Emily, I saw the news," she said with a shaky voice. "How could all this happen?" I just shook my head, unable to speak. I felt the tears coming, but I held them back. I didn't want Michael to see me weak. "Thank you, neighbor," I said in a hoarse voice. "Go get some rest, I'm fine." But when Rose left, I felt the world crashing down on me. The house once filled with Michael's and David's laughter now felt cold and empty. That night, no one touched dinner. I made the bean soup that Michael loves so much, but he just stared at the plate, his eyes sad. David sat alone in a corner of the living room with a bottle of tequila more than half empty. He mumbled, almost voiceless. "My whole life, I trusted the wrong person. I believed her mom." His words broke my heart. I wanted to run and hug him, tell him everything would be okay, but I knew those words were useless now. David had lost the wife he loved, and Michael the mother he admired. Michael cuddled up next to me and asked in a whisper, "Grandma? Where did my mom go? Why isn't she coming back?" His question was like a dagger straight to my heart. I hugged him tightly as tears fell silently. "Mommy, had to go far away for a while, my love," I said, trying to make my voice sound soft. "But Grandma is here, and I'll always be with you." Michael nodded, but I know he didn't understand. How could a 7-year-old boy understand that his mother had chosen a path where he had no place that night? As I was lulling Michael to sleep, the TV in the living room broadcast the news. The image of Sarah handcuffed and with her head down, being led down the station hallways, appeared on the screen. Michael, who wasn't fully asleep yet, saw it by accident. He burst into tears, and his cry of "Mommy!" echoed in the dark room. I immediately hugged him and changed the channel, but that image was already burned into his mind. "Why does my mom have handcuffs, Grandma?" he asked, tears streaming down his cheeks. I held him tighter, not knowing what to answer. "I don't know, my love," I whispered as my own tears fell, "but I promise I will protect you." After the news, my phone rang. It was Prosecutor Cruz. "Mrs. Emily, thank you for your cooperation in this operation," she said, her voice serious but understanding. "We have arrested Daniel Stevens and Sarah, but the case is not over. I need you to prepare to be the primary witness at the trial." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I understand," I replied, my voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever I have to do." The weeks following the arrest at the airport were a whirlwind, as if our whole world had been turned upside down. David took an unpaid leave from work to stay home and take care of Michael. He didn't want the boy to face the curious stares or malicious questions from people. I watched my son, once a strong man, now haggard. His eyes were always red, as if he had cried all possible tears during the long, sleepless nights. I wanted to hug him, to say something to ease his pain, but I knew no words could heal the wound Sarah had left. Michael, my little grandson, didn't stop asking for his mom. "Grandma, when is my mommy coming back?" he would ask in his little voice, his round eyes full of hope. Every time he did, my heart ached. I couldn't tell him the cruel truth that his mother had chosen a path where he didn't fit. Instead, I made up vague stories for him. I took him to the park, bought him ice cream, trying to fill the void in his little heart with brief moments of joy. But every time Michael smiled, I saw the hidden sadness in his eyes. At 7 years old, he was too young to understand, but old enough to feel the loss. I had to go to the station several times to talk with Prosecutor Cruz and Officer Miller. They asked me to recount every detail, from what I saw on the iPad, the call I overheard, to Sarah's look of hatred at the airport. Every time I told it, it was like reliving those horrible moments, but I knew I couldn't stop. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Emily," Prosecutor Cruz would tell me, her gaze both stern and compassionate. "Thanks to you, we've dismantled a large criminal network." I would nod, but I felt no relief. Taking down Daniel Stevens's network was a victory, but my family had paid the price with wounds that would never heal. In the street, the reporters wouldn't leave us alone. They camped out in front of the house, their cameras ready to flash at anyone who came out. Once I went to the market for vegetables, and as I left, a group of them surrounded me. "How does it feel to be betrayed by your own daughter-in-law?" one shouted with the microphone almost in my face. "Did you know about her illegal activities?" I lowered my head and walked as fast as I could, clutching the bag of vegetables as if it were my only support. "Please leave us alone," I told them with a shaky voice, but they didn't stop. When I got home, I bolted the door, drew the curtains, trying to create a safe space for Michael and David, but I knew we couldn't hide forever. One night, when Michael was fast asleep, David sat next to me on the patio bench. The cool air was blowing, bringing the scent of eucalyptus. He put his arm around my shoulder, his voice choked. "Mom, I was blind. I didn't believe you. I didn't want to see the truth. If it hadn't been for you, I would have lost everything." Tears ran down his cheeks, and for the first time in weeks, I saw my son cry. I hugged him, patting his back like when he was a child. "You didn't lose everything, David," I whispered. "You still have Michael, and you have me. We're going to get through this, son." He nodded, but I knew the pain in his heart wouldn't disappear so easily. The trial took place a few months later. I decided not to take Michael, even though he kept asking. "Grandma, I want to see my mom." I didn't want him to see her in the defendant's chair. I didn't want that image to haunt him for the rest of his life. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in the front row facing Sarah and Daniel Stevens. Sarah was convicted of complicity and money laundering, while Daniel received the maximum penalty for leading the fake drug ring and environmental contamination. The case dragged down several high-level officials, shaking the entire pharmaceutical industry. But looking at Sarah with her head down and her hair messy, I felt no victory. I only saw a woman who had lost everything for greed and lies. Returning home after the trial, I felt as if I were waking up from a long nightmare. David was at the door greeting Michael, who was coming from Rose's house. The boy ran to hug me, saying cheerfully, "Grandma, I made a drawing at school today. I want you to see it." I smiled, stroking his head, relieved to see his innocent smile. We sat on the patio. I made a pot of chamomile tea, its aroma filling the air. David sat next to me while Michael played in the garden chasing a butterfly. The sunset was falling, painting the yard golden, and for the first time in many months, I felt a little peace. I looked at Michael and thought about the painful path we had walked. Who would have imagined that because of a simple iPad, a boy took by mistake a whole curtain of lies would come crashing down? That truth was painful. It shattered our family, but I preferred to face it than to live a whole life in a false happiness. I leaned over, gave Michael a kiss on the forehead, and felt his warmth. "I love you, my boy," I whispered with a lump in my throat. Sitting there in the twilight, I promised myself that I would do everything possible to rebuild what was left of this family. Michael needed me, David needed me, and I needed them to keep living. Life had taught me one last lesson. The truth, as cruel as it may be, is always worth facing, because only it can open the way to heal and start anew. I watched Michael run through the garden. His smile was like a ray of sunshine dispelling the darkness, and I knew that although the road ahead would be difficult, we would get through it together step by step. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and locations to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes, I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all, to reclaim your own voice? I would like to know your opinion, because every story can become a light that illuminates the path for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I'll leave you with two of the channel's favorite stories. I'm sure you'll be surprised. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.